We do, it's been very interesting for the first, until the election, about less than 1% of our patients were requesting pills in advance of need. And now we're seeing closer to 6 or 7% of our patients are
Ah,
requesting pills. And that changed almost overnight on when the election results were announced.
welcome to the FMUS podcast. I'm Françoise Girard, and today we're going to speak with Dr. Angel Foster, who's a MD, PhD, who has worked specifically on access to abortion with pills throughout her career. She is an incredibly accomplished person. In addition to being a Rhodes Scholar, she got her medical degree from Harvard Medical School, and she has a doctorate from the University of Oxford, as well as a master's and a bachelor's from Stanford University. And she is currently teaching at the University of Ottawa, where she leads a research project on abortion with pills, medication and abortion. One of the things that I wanted my viewers to have a chance to hear is about the work that someone like you, a doctor, who's been working for years to ensure access to medical abortion with pills, especially in restrictive settings and low resource settings, how you do your work and why you do your work, because I find it incredibly inspirational and incredibly brave. So please tell us about, you set up in 2023, last year, the Massachusetts Medical Abortion Project to ensure that people across the U.S. in restrictive settings, we have now quite a few states that have restricted access to abortion and criminalized it. You've set up this project to ensure that people in those states, such as Texas and Florida and other states, have access to abortion with pills. So can you tell us why you set up the MAP project, and why did you think it was important, and what the need was?
Sure. So first, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be part of this podcast. Maybe it'd be helpful for me to step back a little bit and talk about kind of where the map came from.
Mm.
In 2014, a colleague and I founded a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts called Cambridge Reproductive Health Consultants, or CRHC. And we founded that organization specifically to work in the abortion space that at the time was very politically sensitive. And so we were doing the work globally to identify innovative strategies for increasing access to safe, high quality medication abortion care. And we actually started doing that work in protracted humanitarian settings. And our first project, which was around the community-based distribution of misoprostol, really showed that in northern Thailand, with refugees and undocumented migrants from eastern Myanmar, we could expand access to safe, high-quality medication abortion care in a setting that was both low resource and legally restricted. And so then we started to do that work in other settings in rural Pakistan and Jordan and Uganda, and really sort of created some of the evidence that medication abortion can be done safely and effectively through strategies outside of the formal healthcare system,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be done with mifepristone and misoprostol or with misoprostol alone. And so when the DOMS decision happened in the summer in 2022, and shortly thereafter, the Massachusetts legislature passed the first SHIELD law in the country. And the Massachusetts SHIELD law does a number of things, but it effectively changes the location of where a patient who receives telemedicine medication abortion care is located. So
Mm-hmm.
the patient is now located in Massachusetts for the purpose of that care. When the SHIELD law passed, we sort of, a small group of us sort of thought, what are the lessons we can learn from the global work? And would it be possible to design a practice that leaned into those lessons and provided medication abortion care in restricted states, but was actually part of the formal healthcare system and was built around the Massachusetts SHIELD law?
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent about 9 months sort of figuring out how to create a practice. And so we became the first SHIELD law practice in the United States, in the sense that we are very much developed around the Massachusetts SHIELD law. So we're part of the formal healthcare system, and we comply with all laws, policies, and regulations of the Commonwealth, but we still really benefit from the lessons that we've learned in working in these other settings globally, and we try to apply those lessons to our practice. So that's where the Massachusetts Medication Abortion Access Project kind of came from.
And when you say we learned the lessons from settings like Pakistan and Thailand, what were some of these lessons that you felt were applicable to the United States?
Sure. I think the most important one is about trust, and that we can trust women and other pregnancy capable people to determine for themselves if they're pregnant and they don't want to be. We can trust women and pregnancy capable people to, when they have information, to determine if they're eligible for medication abortion based on gestational age. We can trust them to follow up if they need another intervention or need any kind of emergency care. And that we can trust them without having to do ultrasounds or blood work or have some kind of in-person clinical interaction, that we can trust our patients. And we can work with our patients to then have the best experience possible using these medications in a more demedicalized way.
And that's specifically for telemedicine provision, or it's true for more generally for abortion with pills?
I think it's true more generally. And so the lessons we learned globally really weren't about telemedicine provision per se. It was about community-based distribution. The models were slightly different in different countries, but what it means to work with social workers or lady health volunteers, working in very different kinds of settings, but working within either non-governmental organization or customary practices, and working within those systems to provide access to high quality care, and recognizing that it was safe and effective. And if you can do that work with populations where there's very low literacy, where there's low resources, and emerge from that work being confident that people are able to make these decisions, when we started to look at the United States, we actually have some other assets. We have a postal system that is highly functioning. Not perfect, but that's something that we don't necessarily have in some of our global health settings. We have very high literacy. That doesn't mean that we don't need to be thoughtful about the materials that we present so that they're patient friendly and they're accessible, but we have very high literacy rates in the United States. So thinking about how we could adapt these innovative service delivery strategy to a US context was part of this project.
And can you tell me a bit how the MAP project functions, like practically speaking, if a person wants to access abortion pills and contacts, where does that person find you, and how does it unfold from there?
It's a great question. So we are an asynchronous telemedicine service. And so the way that it works is that a person seeking abortion pills usually finds us through a consolidator website. So an organization or a website like plancpills.org or ineedana.com. People can go onto those sites, search by state, and find us and other providers. And so then they come to the patient comes to our website. We have a two-step process. The first is a short welcome form that allows us to determine the broad eligibility of patients. I mentioned that we are in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has a parental involvement law, so we can only serve patients who are 16 and older. So we screen for chronological age, geography, and for gestational age. So our service is available to people who initiate the process when they're within 11 weeks from the first day of their last menstrual period. And that's because we want to make sure that patients have pills in their hands by 12 weeks and that they're taking the pills within the first trimester. The pills work beyond that, but in terms of the way that we're working as a service, we're working within that first trimester window. So assuming that the patient is eligible on those three fronts, the patient receives an email with links to both a medical questionnaire and then also a series of consent forms. And that medical questionnaire includes all of the standard questions you would ask in any clinical encounter around medication abortion pills, as well as collect some demographic information about our patients. We also have an opportunity for patients through that form to share additional information that they think is important with us. And then the patient also needs to complete a number of consent forms, and that includes signing the Mifeprex agreement and signing our Department of Public Health form and signing a telemedicine form and all of the things, again, that are part of the formal healthcare system. It's just done in this electronic form. And then one of our clinicians, we right now have 4 prescribing clinicians, and we're onboarding a 5th, reviews the medical questionnaire. Most patients are eligible. Most patients are well within our gestational age range as well. If a patient is approved, the patient receives an email about that approval with a link for how to make a payment. And then we follow up from there. If for whatever reason, the clinician doesn't feel like this patient is eligible, they can deny the patient. But often what happens is that if rather than deny outright, the clinician usually would work with the patient and have questions. And so we follow up with individual patients. And that becomes a much more synchronous process where we'll email or text or call to get more information. And so we can make a determination about eligibility. And then once we receive the payment from patients, and we require a $5 minimum payment, although we will waive that on a case-by-case basis. Once we receive the payment, we ship the pills, and we ship the pills using the U.S. postal system. We use priority mail, and they arrive in 2 to 5 business days. The package that we send patients includes the medications, but also an instruction sheet. We include information about ectopic pregnancy. We include information about when to use the pills. So we offer pills for immediate use. We offer pills in advance of need, and we offer pills that are called period pills, so to be used around the time of an expected period. We provide a resource card to all of our patients that outlines information about national and free services that are available if the patient has legal questions or wants post-abortion counseling or has any medical questions. We refer to the M&A hotline. We also provide resources if they want more contraception information. We provide patients with information, digital privacy protection information, so information about how to keep their information private. And then we include a handwritten card in all of the packages that we send. All of our patients also receive specific instructions about how to follow up with us if they have questions or they need additional care. So although we're an asynchronous service, we do provide synchronous follow-up. We have calls, emails, texts. We have lots of resources on our website as well. But once patients receive pills from us, then we're there to work with them individually, especially if there's anything that requires follow-up.
So how many people do you serve every month?
Right now, we're serving about 3,000 patients a month. So in the first year, we served about 5,000 patients total.
Yeah.
So we launched in September of 2023. On October 1st of 2024, we changed our pricing structure, and that changed our volume really just overnight dramatically. And so now it's about 3,000 a month.
So do you mean you lowered your prices? Is that what happened?
We did, but we did it as a sort of experiment. We did an assessment of the first 6 months of the first 6 months of our service, and we'd served almost 2,000 patients. And I mentioned that we have a section of our questionnaire where we invite patients to tell us a little bit more about themselves. And what we found was that our patients were really talking about financial precarity. When we started, we priced it $250, but we used a pay what you can model. And so we, invited patients to pay what they could afford to pay, as long as it was a minimum of $5. And what we found was about a third of our patients were paying $25 or less. And even those patients were talking about how it was hard for them to come up with the resources to make those payments. And we would waive the fee on a case-by-case basis. So we thought that this would be an opportunity to sort of radically reimagine the way that we fund abortion care. And abortion care in the U.S. has long been a kind of fee-for-service model where it's a certain amount per patient.
Right.
And we stepped back and we were like, what would it look like if instead we used something that was closer to a single payer system? And so we secured foundation funding for our second year of operations to cover our core costs. And our remit in this second year is to just provide as much abortion care as we can and see what it looks like in terms of recouping the gap that we need to cover the package that we send out. So the package we send to patients costs $75, and that is the pills, the postage, and the package inserts. And so now we actually invite patients to pay $5 or more, and we tell the patients that $5 is our minimum, which we will waive. $75 covers the cost of that package we send. $150, we send that package and we do it express. And if you pay $250, it pays it forward. And so in our first 4 months, we've been bringing in about $55 per patient in fees. So it's not quite that $75 we need, but between abortion funds and individual donations, we've been able to close that gap. But it's been pretty amazing to see, to be able to kind of live the value of actually making abortion part of healthcare and part of affordable healthcare.
That's right.
And when I think about sort of what happens with abortion in Canada, for example, where in general there are some exceptions to this, but in general people don't have to pay out of pocket for their abortion care. It is covered by provincial and territorial insurance schemes. There are some people who fall through the gaps and fall through the cracks, and there are support services for that. But it's so different to have it be integrated within a model of healthcare. And that's what we're kind of trying to do as a pilot. And so we've really sort of extended our trust women and trust pregnancy capable people model to also trusting people with the money, that we trust that people will afford what they can afford to pay. And for a lot of people, that's a very low amount, but they may come back and pay. We've had many patients who have paid $5, and then 2 months later, they make a $5 donation, and they're trying to pay it forward as well. And that's really heartening.
But that says a lot, Angel, that for many people, $25 is expensive. It just tells you both the need, but also the situation people find themselves in, right?
Absolutely.
It's kind of gut-wrenching to hear that.
It really is. And I mean, we do routinely waive fees. So, we have people who will email us and say, I'm homeless, or I don't have a home right now. I'm living on someone's couch. I really don't, I don't have $5. Well, we don't want your last $5 either.
Right.
We're very
Right.
happy, but once we have that interaction with someone, we can waive those fees. And I'm so struck by the people who pay more than $5, but in very sort of interesting amounts, of folks who pay $7.75. Early on, we had a patient who paid $9.22. And I understand that this is not how electronic payment platforms work, but in my mind's eye, I'm seeing this patient at her kitchen table counting out pennies. What is it that I can afford to pay? It's such a specific amount. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that folks have to do that. That is a broader challenge with the American healthcare system. So I'm happy to. It feels very rewarding to use this time of crisis to also forward some other values about healthcare.
And it's interesting that you're also, because you were speaking about the eligibility, but you also speak about advanced provision. In other words, that you will provide pills for people who are not currently pregnant, but who anticipate they might need it in some foreseeable future. And you will do that taking into account the fact that they're just a person of reproductive age, I guess.
Right.
Is that basically the criteria?
It is. And very, very limited exclusion criteria. The one population of patients we won't provide advanced pills in advance of need to are people who have an IUD that's inserted, because
Right.
you need to have that IUD taken out before you take the pills. And because if a person gets pregnant while on an IUD, there's a greater likelihood that pregnancy is an ectopic pregnancy. It reduces the risk of pregnancy overall, but if a pregnancy happens, there's a higher probability of it being ectopic, in which case the pills we send won't work. We do, it's been very interesting until the election, about less than 1% of our patients were requesting pills in advance of need. And now we're seeing closer to 6 or 7% of our patients are requesting pills. And that changed almost overnight when the election results were announced. So, the 2 days before, the day of the election and the day before, we were, still at about less than 1%. And then, the 2 days after the election, we just saw this enormous spike, and it was really driven by requests for future use pills. And we've seen that continue. And I will say that I haven't done the full dive into our January numbers yet, because obviously we're still in early February and haven't had a lot of time, but it looks like we had another increase in demand for advanced provision pills after the inauguration.
Wow. Yeah. Now people are really taking the threat seriously.
Yeah.
And do you send pills, you prescribe and send pills all over the US, or only to restrictive states?
We send pills all over the US, but for patients who are in states other than Massachusetts where there's Medicaid coverage for abortion, we do remind them in that initial response. So after they fill out what we call our welcome form, we do say in that response, you appear to be contacting us from a state where there's access to clinic-based abortion services and other telemedicine services, and where there's insurance coverage for abortion, including Medicaid. Here are some resources about finding a provider closer to home. However, if you need care from our service, here's the link if they're otherwise approved. And we do that because, first of all, it's important that we continue to have clinics. We need to have a sort of robust service delivery landscape, and we don't, want to be competing with providers in California or New York. They also, the Shield Law really wasn't designed. The Massachusetts Shield Law wasn't really designed for Massachusetts licensed clinicians to provide pills to patients in California. It was meant to fill what is a true access gap that happened after Dobbs. And so, we lean into that. Having said that, we do provide to all 50 states, all U.S. territories, and to military personnel and their dependents, and State Department personnel and their dependents. And, we've had some very specific cases. Early on, we had a case of a patient who was in Washington, who was a tourist, who was on a tourist visa, and it was in Washington State, but wasn't going to be able to navigate the system to get insurance coverage and needed pills sent to a hostel, for example. And so those are the kinds of patients then that we're continuing to serve in states where there's insurance coverage and relatively high access.
Right. Do you want to say something more about the military bases? Because that's very interesting that our people in uniform need to turn to you for care, that they might, if they happen to be based in a state that is restrictive, they lose their access to abortion care. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so for military personnel that are within the United States, we'll serve, we can send them, and that includes to bases. We also serve military personnel who are abroad. So if a military personnel or their dependent are abroad and we can send the pills to an APO, we do that. Same thing with State Department officials. And it's true. I mean, for military personnel and their dependents, the patchwork of abortion access in the United States has had pretty significant implications. And obviously there have been discussions about that over the last few years, including, guidance from the Biden administration about how to allow military personnel, and of course their dependents, to be able to leave and travel to another state if they were on a base in a state where abortion was banned or severely restricted. And we're seeing already with the Trump administration that they're rolling back that guidance.
Yeah, and I'm very shocked by that, because you're asked to serve your country, and you don't choose where you're going to be deployed or based, and you have completely different access to a vital health service depending on where you end up. And it's just shocking.
It really is.
It's really something else. Now, what about the legal risks? That shield laws were put in place to protect providers who decide to do this, to, sitting in Massachusetts, to be in touch with patients through Zoom and other means of communication, and then prescribe and then send out the pills, mail them out. So what are some of the ways in which you manage that risk? I mean, the law is there, but how confident are you that you're, we all saw Dr. Carpenter from New York state being indicted in Louisiana last week. So, what are the steps you take to make sure that you're protected, all of you?
We designed the map on a distributed risk model
Mm.
with the intention of making it harder to identify a particular person who was implicated in a particular patient's abortion care. And so the person who orders the pills is different from the person who prescribes the pills, is different from the person who mails the pills, is different from the person who's processing the payment. And patients do not know which individual was involved with their care. They know that the practice was involved with their care.
Ah,
And we did that to protect those who are working with the map. And we also think about this as being potentially protective for patients as well. One thing about the Massachusetts Shield Law that I think is really important is that the Massachusetts Shield Law protects not only providers, but it explicitly protects helpers and funders. And that was always written in the act itself. And I think that's really important because we've been able to uh, really build out our service based on volunteers. So it started with monthly and now they're weekly. We do packing parties where volunteers in Massachusetts come to our office and pack up packages that we then send to patients, and they're the ones who are writing the notes that are going into each package. And it has really created a sense of community. We have a community engagement director who's been doing a lot of work building out this volunteer base in Massachusetts, and then also working with abortion funds and reproductive justice organizations in the states where we're serving a lot of patients. But that has been a really important part of it. And again, the Massachusetts Shield Law really lends itself to that. Having said that, we also, as is true, I would say, for any public-facing Shield Law provider, every individual, regardless of whether they're prescribing pills or helping or publicly visible, every individual is making a decision about risk tolerance, decisions about things like travel. And so, for example, for me, I don't travel to or through ban or restricted states anymore. I also don't drive a car outside of Massachusetts. And so, just really trying to think through where there are potential risks and exposures and trying to mitigate those.
Wow. So that means there's a lot of states where you would not travel.
Yeah.
Well, is that also why you're teaching in Canada? I was kind of intrigued by that as a
Right.
as a
So
Canadian myself.
so my big girl job is that I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa, and at the University of Ottawa, I run a large research group that's dedicated to global abortion research. I also have a university research chair in medication abortion. So this is a big part of my research agenda, and I've been doing abortion-related research my entire career. And so I continue to do that work, and I have to say it's incredibly it's wonderful to be an abortion researcher in Canada. I came to the University of Ottawa in 2011, and I think Canadians will understand this, that this was under the Harper administration, so a conservative government that was not necessarily a fan of abortion, and in fact very explicitly had said abortion is not part of maternal child health care and all of that. And this was the same time when there was the Obama administration in the United States, so one of the more progressive Democratic administrations on abortion. And I will say it was easier to be an abortion researcher in Canada under Harper than it was to be an abortion researcher in the United States under Obama. And part of it just has to do with kind of broader social and cultural dynamics, both within the academy, within funding institutions and stuff like that. And that's not a slight on the Obama administration. It's really just talking about a very, very different dynamic and kind of baseline. Now, I do a lot of work in Canada around expanding access to abortion services in Canada. And so I'm very aware of where there are continued access challenges, but I'd say it's just starting at a very different place. And so it has been great as an abortion researcher to have this Canadian base and the support that I have from my department and my faculty and the university. And they've all been incredibly supportive of my work in this project. And so a big piece of my work now around the map is also doing research around the map, which I'm able to, use my Canadian perch to do.
Ah, that's fantastic. And is there also a telemedicine abortion in Canada and abortion with pills being mailed, and that whole modality that you describe, is it also being used in Canada? And have some of the lessons from the MAP
Yeah.
project come back to Canada?
Yeah, it is. I will say, prior to COVID, so the history of medication abortion in Canada is one that's quite interesting. Canada was, of course, a very late
Yeah.
adopter of medication abortion with mifepristone and misoprostol. And so, mifepristone and misoprostol through the combination pack Mifique and Miso didn't become available in Canada until 2017. And at that time, there were an astonishingly small number of facilities that had some kind of telemedicine service. And it was mostly like long-standing providers out of British Columbia who had been involved with early clinical trial work around medication abortion, many, many years earlier, who were early adopters of medication abortion and also had other kind of had already been doing some kind of telehealth or teleconsultation services. When, in 2017, it took a while for the regulatory systems in Canada to allow, for example, pharmacist dispensing of medication abortion drugs, and that kind of rolled out. There was early requirements around pre-abortion ultrasound, and that was eliminated in 2019. And I say all of that because it kind of created the stage that when COVID came, then there was this real shift to providing more telemedicine services in Canada in general, and then also around medication abortion care. And so we really started to see a change in that care after 2020. And part of it is that some of these regulatory encumbrances had been dismantled, and then COVID allowed for a pivot, which, among other things, allowed for more rapid, and these are such technical health systems issues, but figuring out how to rapidly create new codes to be able to get paid to be able to provide telemedicine services in provinces that didn't have a lot of telemedicine infrastructure before. And so that shift affected abortion care. And so now we're seeing more of it. And medication abortion in Canada has really taken off. I mean, in 2017, the National Abortion Federation has Canadian members and, was the sort of largest professional society for abortion providers in North America. And among NAF members, prior to the introduction of mifepristone, it was around 5 or 8% of all abortions were with medications, and it was mostly methotrexate, and it was mostly out of BC and kind of a couple of high volume clinics. And even within 2 years, that had increased to being more than a third of abortions being provided by these facilities. And now the numbers just suggest it's probably more, hovering close to 50% of all abortions are with Mifique and Miso. So it has just been an enormous shift in such a small amount of time. And for a place like Canada, I think, one of the things that made me really excited to take my job in Canada was actually around medication abortion, because it really looked like an opportunity to expand access. And so my research group started to do work back in 2011, to document sort of where some of the access barriers were and how mifepristone and misoprostol could fill that. And I think we're really starting to see that promise be realized, which is very exciting.
Yeah, so Canada could be soon like the US, where it's more than 2/3 of abortion, or maybe even more. Yeah.
I think so. And I think what's so interesting about the Canadian story with mifepristone and misoprostol is that, it's a late adopter, right? Canada comes late to the mifepristone party, but has now leapfrogged all of these other countries that have had mifepristone sometimes for decades in terms of how it's being provided, how it's being dispensed, what providers can actually write prescriptions for it, and for a country like Canada with such a large landmass and such a small and concentrated population, mifepristone really has there's a tremendous opportunity to expand access to abortion care in rural and remote areas in the north. And I think we're really starting to see that play out, which is exciting. And we see some real parallels between what's happening in Canada and what's happened in Australia as well, which has some similar kinds of challenges from a health systems perspective in terms of big geographic area with a relatively small population that's quite concentrated, but still a really important rural and remote population that needs care.
Getting back to the US to conclude, I'm wondering if you see this abortion with pills via telemedicine as a growing trend, or because of the legal risks and, the menace that is now, just floating over the entire field of abortion with the Trump 2.0
Yeah.
administration. Do you see it as a growing field, as an opportunity, or what do you think?
I absolutely do. And here I'll share this perspective. So, prior to Dobbs, abortion access in many of the states that were most affected by the Dobbs decision already had terrible access to abortion. I don't
Right.
want to take away how bad the Dobbs decision is. It's awful. It's a human rights travesty. It absolutely is. But if you take the state of Mississippi, right? So that's the state from which the Jackson Women's Health Organization is out of. That's the state that's directly implicated in the Dobbs decision. In 2020, so prior to Dobbs, there was one providing clinic, that was Jackson Women's Health Organization, in the entire state.
Right.
A medication abortion cost $800. You
Ah,
needed to do multiple visits. There's no Medicaid funding for abortion in Mississippi. So people had to pay out of pocket or contact abortion funds, assemble the money to be able to pay. And or, and many people were already traveling out of state because it might be closer to travel to a neighboring state than to travel to this one clinic.
yeah.
And there were about 3,600 abortions that were provided in Mississippi in 2020, or I think those are the 2019 data that were reported in 2020. In 2024, it looks like, based on the projections that we have from the We Count data, it looks like there will be more like 4,500 abortions that were performed in Mississippi with medication abortion pills, principally coming from Aid Access and from our service, and then one other Shield Law provider that was providing in all 50 states.
Ah,
So in some ways, abortion is actually more accessible in Mississippi today than it was, and it's more affordable than it was prior to Dobbs. And so there's this kind of deep irony that's happened, which is because of the Shield laws and because of telemedicine, the space that's opened up, we're now able to provide care to patients who weren't getting affordable care before. And, all of this is possible because like with Canada, as we were talking about, telemedicine abortion care really took off during COVID in the United States. And I think
yes.
we really learned from that. And then with the Shield laws, now we're able to provide telemedicine services in states that didn't permit telemedicine medication abortion care before, like Mississippi. I think the challenge for us as Shield law providers, or one of the challenges for us, is a legitimacy challenge. And so I think one of the things that limits our ability to meet the incredible demand that there is for abortion care that's unmet in banned and restricted states is that, people wonder if this is a legitimate service. We get this question every day. And here I'll just invite you to think of a 23-year-old woman who's in Texas, who, because of SB 8 and then Dobbs, has basically heard for 3 years that abortion is illegal in Texas. She's not in college. She's not tied up with feminist or reproductive health rights and justice networks. But she goes online and she finds out that there's this group in Massachusetts that will send her FDA-approved medications for $5, and they will come to her house within 5 days. And that sounds bananas. I
Yeah.
mean, that just can't be real, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
and so I think that is actually one of the challenges that we really face. How do we enhance the legitimacy of our service? Given that we're a small practice, we're not going to be able to launch some, ginormous social media campaign and get the word out everywhere. But how do we do that? How do we assure patients that we are providing high quality care, that we take follow-up care seriously when our patients have complications, we work with them on their treatment plans, that these pills are safe and effective. And I think the more that legitimacy grows, the more medication abortion care we'll see. I also think, and we intend with the MAP to continue our practice as long as we can be a legally compliant practice. And so
Right.
we're not doing any sort of anticipatory obedience. We continue our operations until we can't do them anymore because of an actual legal change that affects us. That is our plan. But even if we and other Shield law providers had to close, I think medication abortion access will just continue in the United States. There are international providers that can send pills. There will be new innovative strategies. Like, these pills are not going away. If the FDA re-regulates them, there will still be ways that people can get pills from international sources. It might take a little bit longer. It might be more expensive. We might have to think through other strategies. But that ship has sailed. Medication abortion is absolutely a part of the abortion landscape in the United States. And that isn't going to change, even if all the shield law practices had to close down.
Right. So we're not putting the genie back in the bottle.
I don't think so. I don't
No.
see how that could happen. And I mean, it's not just mifepristone and misoprostol. We know misoprostol works very well on its own
Alone, yeah.
and is an excellent abortion regimen. And so, I think, obviously, if we have two medications that together, not really a safety or even an efficacy issue. It's more about the abortion process. Using
Right.
mifepristone makes the abortion process a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
And that's just sort of thinking first principles about how these drugs work. But, misoprostol alone in places where mifepristone isn't available there's tremendous satisfaction with using this regimen. And certainly, if we can, so we'll be able to provide that care as well, even if mifepristone is upregulated or in the United States or something else happens to that particular drug. Misoprostol is a wonderful alternative. So I really just don't see medication abortion going away. And, that, again, I can kind of hold two things at once, which is that Dobbs is a human rights tragedy and it's a social injustice, and we need to do everything we can to work toward restoring abortion rights. And I would say, actually, what we really need to lean in on is decriminalization and how to move abortion out of any kind of criminal code.
Right.
And we can use this opportunity to reimagine the way that we provide care and to provide more care to more people in ways that are safe and effective and affordable. And we can do both of those things at the same time.
Thank you so much, Angel, for these somewhat optimistic, certainly hopeful words. And I share with you that sentiment. We're not going back, are we?
No.
No.
And that is really heartening. And that's the thing I hold on to. I also, I try every day to avoid the doom spiral that can come from reading every sort of new executive order or what's happening in these different areas. Oh, it's just, it's exhausting. And, but what I try to do is just step back and say, look, we can do this. We can continue to make, we are in a place where we can continue to make sure that people have access to care. We need to do more of it. We need to get the word out. We need lots of different strategies. And I would say this is a moment where we also just need to experiment and do as many different kinds of things as we can. We haven't talked about it today, but there are community networks that are providing medication abortion pills, particularly in states in the South. And that's a really exciting model as well. We need all of those things. And so I am on the one hand, it's such a hard time, and I still do have optimism that we will continue to be able to get people the care that they want, need, and deserve.
Thank you for your bravery and for your words of hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.